There we go. Okay.
Okay.
Oh my goodness.
All set. Yes.
All set. Boy,
Yes.
it's been. That took too long. So Andrew, I had to share right off the bat. I got Bruno Moretti, friend of the show. He's been on. We had a great episode talking about autonomous vehicles and stuff. Reached out right away saying he also doesn't use a case on his phone.
Oh, really?
Yes.
So that's two of you.
Yes, so that's true. So I'm at least not alone.
A majority of two.
So I was pleased to hear. I was like, thank you for reaching out, Bruno.
To anybody that's thinking, what the heck are you talking about?
Yep.
You need to listen to the previous episode.
That's right. And to discover, just take a look in your pocket. Do you put a case on your phone or not? And let us know. As simple as that. But no, it's been, it was tremendous. And also, I just want to mention too, which is, we get nothing for this. We're not sponsored by the National Park Service in the United States or anything, but just came off of a fantastic vacation trip with the family to a bunch of the national parks. And just a reminder of if you're in the U.S. or traveling to the U.S. with an interest of what an amazing treasure these national parks really are. So heavy advocate for, go see a national park if you get a chance.
Absolutely.
They're amazing. The people who work there are amazing. And it's just a wonderful place, wonderful time for kids and all that kind of stuff too. So
I agree.
Tons going on.
Mm-hmm.
I say we can just jump basically.
We've done some long cold opens, so why don't we just keep it short this time?
We'll do a short one. We've got, and I think today, we're kind of coming into, there's so many moving pieces. It's sort of like we can almost turn this into like a potpourri of like all kinds of fun stuff that we've got going on. So works for me.
Okay, let's go.
Let's jump into it.
Initializing waveform.
Modulating signals for transmission.
Exploring the possible, probable, and preferable futures.
Welcome to Modem Futura. All right. And I think Jim Dunnigan will probably time us. That may be the record for the shortest cold open we've ever done.
I think it probably is.
Which is good. That's fine. Variety is the spice of life, as they say. Yeah. So
that's it. Of course, we do have to do the intro now.
Yeah, that's true. We almost forgot.
Right.
There's so many times, but
with the magic of editing, we got it in.
Yes, and thank you for reminding me because I think I would have just steamrolled without forgetting. But absolutely. First of all, for our returning listeners, thank you for staying with us. For our brand new listeners, it's always helpful to introduce ourselves. Welcome to Modem Futura. I'm Sean Leahy, joined by my co-host
Andrew Maynard.
And that means this is Modem Futura, the show that explores the...
So what is it we do here?
I don't even know anymore. Obviously. So Modem Futura, we explore essentially the intersection of technology, society, and all the crazy cool things that are happening. We investigate the possible, probable, and preferred futures. It's like the first time I've ever recorded this.
This is a test, by the way.
Oh my gosh. You take 1 week off and it's like the wheels cometh off.
It's like one of those sort of online tests you have to sort of take every year or so. And Sean is now getting the message saying, you got 3 out of 5. Retake.
Yeah, you gotta redo it, my friend. But in all seriousness, Modem Futura, we explore the edge essentially of looking at the intersection of technology, society,
and the future.
While
having really interesting conversations and hopefully stimulating and challenging conversations along the way.
That's right. And also literally asking those deep questions that ground a lot of our things of what does it mean to be human in the future.
Right. And note to self, have longer cold opens in the future so you can get your act together.
I gotta warm up, man. I'd say this is a very entertaining.
I think this sort of sets the tone for the whole day and the whole show today. It's one of those days.
That's right. So it'll be a little bit of a mix, and we're going to work hard, I think, to keep each other sort of
on track
today because it's just it's one of those days.
Yep. So, but as I was saying, so I think one of the things we'll talk about, I gave a keynote at a conference this morning and came in and just sort of saying, well, that's my sort of intellectual heavy lifting for the day. My brain is just utterly mush now, which means that this could be the most entertaining show we've recorded.
I know that's a good place to start because I'm like, who knows what's going to happen now, right? We've already. Hey, we just demonstrated. It's the starting gun went off and I sprinted and I fell right on my face.
There we are. Yes.
which I feel like, today it's one of those days.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I do want to ask, because like I said, you just came off of a keynote address,
yes. Yep.
which is, again, for anyone who's done one, they know. If you have never delivered a keynote, there's an incredible amount of like adrenaline and rush when you do it, and then you come down from that, and then I'm grabbing you right as you're like, my brain is done.
I just want to curl up in a corner and sleep.
Yeah, you're like, my brain is exhausted. I'm done for the day, and then it's like, hey, let's record a podcast. But before we do that, just a couple quick things that have popped up recently that I'm curious. I haven't even had time to dig into it, but I believe it was just yesterday that OpenAI, or maybe it was the day before. Anyway, with the last 2 days, OpenAI released their OpenAI Academy, I think they're calling it. The AI, oh wow, this is going to be a tough one. The AI literacy program. Have you seen this?
I haven't seen this.
Okay.
No.
Well, all right. So two people talking about a thing they haven't really seen much, I think. But I thought it was interesting.
But I've seen, they've been sort of pitching this and sort of building up to it. So now this is live.
Yes. And it just dropped. I'm pulling up the page right now so we can actually put some credibility behind what I talk about.
Yes.
But yeah, they essentially launched this thing called the OpenAI Academy.
Right.
With this, the claim here is it's a new initiative to fuel innovation by investing in developers and organizations leveraging AI, starting in low and middle income countries. So really also providing opportunities for people to get access, but also for people to understand there's a big push here around like the literacy element as well.
Yep.
And learning.
Yep.
So I started signing up for it, but then was like, they're like, we have a full course that you can take. I'm like, I don't have time for this right now.
Right.
But I do want to come back to it because I do think it's interesting. I think much needed. And we've talked before too. I mean, I think sort of critically, we've poked fun at, companies like OpenAI putting, ungodly amounts of money into the development of new data centers and all these things. And then that question was like, yeah, but what about the risk? What about informing people on, so at least, having not gone into it, this may change once we do.
They're doing it, and they're beginning to address a really important issue. There are also challenges here because the question is, should this be a private enterprise doing this, or should this be more of a public endeavor? But the idea that so far, many of these AI platforms have been designed for affluent countries. I mean, the US has really dominated things, an English-speaking US. Of course, China is catching up now. But there are many communities around the world that they don't have the resources to build their own systems. They don't have the ability to actually tap into the existing systems. And even where they can tap in, they're tapping into a system that has been trained on largely a Western way of seeing the world. Or if you're looking at China and DeepSeek, sort of an Asian sort of way of seeing the world. But it means that if they're looking at stuff which is culturally responsive, and by that, I'm not being politically correct, I just mean something that actually sort of responds in ways that sort of match the culture that it's embedded in, it's hard. If you're looking at systems that will respond in the language you're used to, especially if you're in a small area where there aren't many people that actually speak that language, you've got an issue. So initiatives like this really begin to open up the possibility of very diverse people around the world beginning to explore and engage with AI, which I think is really important. But the challenge is, who is leading this? Is it a for-profit company that's based in the US? Or is it ideally something more of a consortium of nonprofits and organizations across the world that truly have the communities that they're engaging with at the focus, rather than just making even bigger products and profits?
And I think right now it's like they're doing it themselves, right? And now, to be fair, there was always a critical lightning bolt shot through, and I'm like, right, that's like having Joe Camel talk about tobacco safety or something, right?
Yes,
when it's like the sugar, a candy bar company being like, we need to talk about brushing your teeth more.
Use it responsibly.
And so I think,
but use it.
We're not telling you to stop using our product. We're just going to. So I mean, I do. But hey, all that aside, again, I haven't gone through it, so I will at some point here kind of go into it, because I think, again, that is needed, and I think it's a great, if nothing else, a great first step towards hopefully a consortium of these things. Because there's a level of it shouldn't be one privately held company that is controlling the narrative of what the literacy is around these tools and things. However, they're also on the forefront of building these tools. So in some cases, who better to share what they are?
They've got to be involved at some point and in some way. And of course, you begin to look at the possibilities here. And we've talked about this before, but the idea of being able to take some of these open source models and actually install them locally, there you've got a model that local communities actually have control over. And their literacy becomes incredibly important because they've got to understand how this potentially impacts their lives, where the affordances are, where the dangers are. But it's all on their own terms if you do it in the right way. Yeah,
absolutely. And with that too, right? I mean, essentially it's, what's the Spider-Man thing? With great power comes great responsibility.
Right, yes.
But there is, I mean, at some point, I mean, I've talked long at many times, many episodes, and I'll vibrate out of my chair with excitement around that idea of having a small computer, whether a laptop or a little desktop.
We might have mentioned this before.
I still haven't bought anything, by the way.
Okay,
so
good.
Defense against the dark arts has held true. But, I get really excited about what that potential means in terms of, again, coming back to that more of like that Marshall McLuhan. It's not the individual thing, that piece of hardware or that piece of software. It's what that affords over time and the shift and the change. But with that also means there's no one to potentially put guardrails on.
Right.
And so theoretically, with a open-weighted model, running things on your own, you might be able to go down a pathway that otherwise you wouldn't if it was in a cloud-based infrastructure like an OpenAI or a Google. And so, there is also that from a deep perspective of knowing what you're doing. To understand that if you're, for example, the person who's administrating, let's say, a local private edge-based AI machine, and then your kids, for example, maybe they're using it.
Right.
And how do they interpret the information and things that are coming out of it?
Yes.
And understanding when I push this lever, or lever, I guess.
Lever.
Okay.
I'll let that go.
Yeah. When I push this lever, what happens to that lever over there?
Right. Yep.
And but I think that's
of course we do this with all technologies.
Yes.
It's just that I think this is bigger and more transformative. But just look at driving. Driving is an interesting one because if you're, say, driving out off-road in the desert, the things you need to know are how to make the car go and stop and turn and not flip. If you're driving along roads, you've got to learn very rapidly how to navigate all the other people on the roads, which is where we have these programs to develop a certain level of driving literacy. Because it would be crazy. Well, I was going to say it would be crazy putting somebody on the road that has no idea, but this is a country where you put 14-year-olds on the road.
Yeah. Well, driving around Phoenix here, I can tell you a lot of those people have no idea what they're doing.
But the fact is, I despite the problems with the analogy, we learn. We have some formality there, but it's actually individuals learning the skills. And the same applies to other technologies. You need some way of helping people learn the skills and the abilities to use those technologies in safe and smart and creative ways.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, if you think about a lot of other, either technologies or industries too, I mean, there's a built-in progression. I mean, if we stick with the driving thing, at least here in the United States, right, there's driver education programs. And within the point, right, is to go slow, go measured with a guide, with an instructor, so that you understand when I do this, what happens, or I get into a situation, what is the safest way for me to get out of this situation or manage this situation to mitigate harm to myself or to other people.
Right.
This is actually, I'm talking about, that's actually a really good metaphor. Because, but you have that sort of, and I, again, as someone who went through it, as a grown up now, I look back, I'm like, they gave us the keys to the car at 16 years old. Are you crazy?
Right.
But so I might be in the shouted down minority here, but I'm like, people shouldn't drive until they're like 25. When the frontal cortex has finished developing, maybe then.
Right.
But again, you have this time to understand and go through the process of learning with an iterative feedback of when I do this, I'm in a new situation. And oftentimes, I think if we kind of jump back into technology more broadly, but certainly with AI, things move so quickly that you can take this period of time and condense it down to where you sort of are eliminating those sort of natural occurrences of learning,
Sure, yes,
and it's like, I mean, going back to like the 10,000 hour to be an expert idea.
Right. Or I was even thinking of system 1 and system 2 thinking. I mean, system 1 is sort of the intuitive stuff that you sort of assimilate into what you do naturally. And the system 2, I've got this the right way around, I think I have, where you're consciously thinking.
Yeah.
And in driving, you have to go from that consciously thinking of every single thing you do to it just becoming natural.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, it's that mechanical check of changing lanes and looking, putting your signal on, which, I'm looking at you, everyone who doesn't use your signal.
Do you do this in the US, the mirror signal maneuver? I mean, this is drilled into us in the UK. Mirror signal maneuver. Oh,
it might, I don't know.
That's right.
I don't know. Because I mean,
you were 16, you would have forgotten all of
right?
that.
The last thing I was worrying about was mirror signal maneuver.
Right.
Yeah, no, I don't. Well, it wasn't drilled in enough to remember it. That's for sure.
This explains so much about US driving.
Yeah, it does.
We probably ought to leave that.
I would like to say I do that naturally.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, that is the piece there. And I think, and I was thinking, I mean, often this conversation has kind of come up when we've been talking about AI and education. Mm-hmm. And then let me say this, and this may be a good segue then to pull in from your keynote this morning. Mm-hmm. But, oftentimes, again, when we have technology, we talked before around, regardless of what the emergent technology is, when you integrate that in an educational space, we've had frameworks and tool sets for dealing. We talked about SAMR and TPAC and all that kind of stuff.
Yep.
But the other part to that, that maybe we didn't mention then, is also you have time. Mm-hmm. Right. So if you think about these big transformational changes, like, I mean, going back, whether it be the personal computer in every classroom or one-to-one or the internet, right? These were not changes that happened in 1 or 2 years.
Yes.
We
had time.
Even in some cases, a decade or more.
Yes.
From when the product was launched, commercially and enterprise available, and a long arc of people understanding how it can be used, developing use cases, examples. What are the security risks? I mean, things that were well known by the time it got to education, which oftentimes, there's this lag of period that a lot of people would clamor and try to shorten that gap. Yep. But during that time frame, that was your training. People learned how to use them. They learned how to manage them. And so by the time, even if it was slow, by the time it got into application, there was a well-known sort of spectrum of what it can do, what it can't do, what are its affordances, what are its constraints. With technologies that move like AI have,
you don't have that time. And this is where I've written about these feedback loops, where when a technology transition is relatively slow, you have got time to assimilate and think. So you have this sort of, it's effectively a negative feedback loop. So everything is controlled. No matter sort of how things are going, you learn how to adapt. But when you get to the point where things are going so fast that you can't respond, you have this lag between technology innovation response that leads to a positive feedback loop, and you had the potential of everything just going wild. You go from a nice controlled system to a completely chaotic system.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
And that's the fear with technologies like this. I hasn't happened yet, I think, but there is a possibility that we push so fast that everything suddenly becomes really chaotic.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, even just again coming back to that, if I use that model of like educational technology again, right? I mean, and this applies to enterprise as well, is you would have literal job classifications or teams of individuals who their role was understanding what these technologies do, and then help apply that to the context of the organization, whether it's a school, a business, or whatever.
Yes. Yep.
But in today's world with how fast things are moving with AI, those same type of people are learning at the exact same moment the end user is already
that's
using it. And so there's no time in that way to even fully grasp what these things are capable of.
And it gets even worse if the changes being brought about by that technology are so profound that even the ways that those professionals think don't match where the technology is going, which is actually what I was trying to sort of press forward with this talk this morning.
Yeah. All right, well, that's a perfect segue. So So let's talk about it. So let me try to set this up for you. Let me see if so let your brain try to rewire itself real quickly here on the fly to kind of remember what just happened. Right. Let me ask you this first. There are times where I have given a talk or something, and I'm like, I have no memory of what I just said.
Yeah,
I'll walk off the stage or whatever, and I'm like, what did I just say?
No,
Okay,
exactly. Yes, no,
okay.
I have exactly the same. I'm getting better with time. I've learned that discipline of listening to myself and being aware of my environment as I'm speaking, so I can sort of modulate and moderate. But even so, you get into the moment, and it's very hard to remember exactly what you said afterwards.
You walk off and you're like, I hope that was good, because I don't know what I just said. And it's funny. Another quick aside. So this was during pandemic-ish time, whatever. I got COVID, and I woke up symptomatic the morning I was doing a webinar with Microsoft. And so it was like this big with the Times Higher Ed. So it was like this big thing, and I was really excited for it. And I was all prepared, and I had all this stuff. So I was like, what do I do? I kind of woke up in a panic. I was like, well, it's all virtual anyway, so I'll just soldier on.
Dose yourself up.
It was a fever. Like, I have absolutely no idea what I said. And right afterwards, I was messaging people who I were like virtually watching. I'm like, tell me what. They're like, oh, it was good. It was great. Everyone liked it. I was like, oh, it was such a relief, because I'm like,
but were you invited back?
Well, actually, no. I've been invited to other things since. But it was one of those moments where I was like, I literally closed the thing, and it was like on Zoom or whatever. And I just remember being like, well, I just completely blacked out on that memory. I have absolutely no idea what I said, but apparently it was at least somewhat cohesive. Okay, so today you were just delivering a keynote at the 2025 is it Yidan?
Yidan. Yes.
Yidan Prize Conference. That was a meeting with the future of teaching and learning that was held here at ASU sponsored by the Mary Lou Fulton College for Teaching and Learning Innovation. That's a tough one for me to say, because they changed the college name, and I'm still grappling with the new one. But that was held today. So in there, and should I mention a little bit about?
So this is actually a prize which is incredibly prestigious, and it's given out. 2 prizes are given out each year to people sort of in either researching sort of education or in the practice of education. They're big prizes. $3 million. I think it's $3 million.
That's
each. And last year, one of the recipients was a colleague from ASU, which is why we're hosting it. But it's really a convening of people who study education and practice education and think about education.
Yeah.
So this was a great opportunity to talk to these brilliant people in the field about what's coming down the pike. And I was asked to be provocative, so I was a little provocative.
That's great.
Which is why I ran off the stage and left at the end.
Thank you, everyone. That's my time. I gotta go. Well, I want to. So I'll just give a little background here. I've done the due diligence to pull up there. So just a little background, just on the Yidan Prize. They have a nice tagline about just their background, that where learning flourishes, so does society. So I'll read this, and then I want to hear. Then let's get into it. This is from their website, which is just yidanprize.org. We're a global foundation committed to creating a better world through education. We established the Yidan Prize in 2016 to champion the change makers making that possible. We know from decades of research that education leads to people living safer, healthier, longer lives. Every intervention that improves access to quality education builds to a better world. To meet our goals, then, we need to find the most effective ideas and spread them far and wide. So great foundation.
Great aspirations.
Yep. So people look it up, and I'm sure there's lots of information there on how you can submit to be considered and stuff like that for that. So okay. So take us to this morning.
So kicking off, obviously with artificial intelligence being a big thing in education and learning circles these days, the whole conference was sort of set up with this being sort of one of the things that is on people's minds. And I came in, I think my title was, "What does the future look like?" This was the title that was given me, which of course, who knows what it looks like. But I took it as an opportunity to really push people to think about potentially where artificial intelligence is taking us from a learning and education perspective. And one of the things that I've really been thinking a lot about over the last several months and probably a year or so now is how the advances we're seeing and how the advances we're likely to see over the next 1 or 2 years fundamentally challenge our whole approach to learning and education, how we even think about it. So I did this, and again, it was provocative. So I actually sort of basically set this up to say that this is one way of thinking about this. It's not necessarily the right way. Things might not turn out this way. But this is an important way of thinking about it. So there were 2 framings here. One of them was the framing of how technology changes what we do as individuals and society. And the fact is, if you look at the last 20,000 plus years, we as species have got a history of inventing things which allow us to do things differently and better. But AI seems to be a fundamentally different game changer here. So I actually started off with a quote from Dario Amodei, the CEO of Anthropic, where he talks about his concept of the compressed 21st century. And he makes the argument that when we eventually reach what you might call artificial general intelligence or incredibly powerful AI, and he thinks we'll do this in the next few years, we have the possibility of accelerating the rate of invention and innovation up to a factor of 10 compared to what it is at the moment. And the way he describes this is saying, imagine everything that happened in the 20th century, those 100 years, which are an incredible 100 years.
If a lot happened. Right?
Sort of the invention of flight, going to the moon.
Electricity,
yes. And the computer, the internet. It was an explosion of innovation.
And he says, 3 industrial revolutions in that time, basically.
Right. Then he says, imagine if all of that happened in 10 years.
Yeah.
And he gets people to imagine what the 21st century will be like if everything we imagine potentially happening over the next 100 years happens in 10 years. And he says there's a possibility that advanced AI could bring this about. So again, even if there's just a small probability of this happening, it completely changes how we think about the role of learning and education and educators in society. So that was one framing. But the second framing was how technology changes who we are. And again, technologies over the years have changed that in small ways, the ways we interact with technologies. And a good example is our phones or social media.
Sure.
They change the way we think, the way we interact with others. They change society, but actually in small increments.
Yeah.
But then if you look at someone like Mark Daly, who we've obviously had on the show, when he begins to talk about how AI is making intelligence free, and unlike any other technology, it is fundamentally challenging who we are because it's beginning to emulate those things that we thought were preciously uniquely human. We're now looking at a potential future where AI not only fundamentally changes what we can do, but also who we are. And within that framework, I made the point that this deeply challenges our understanding of what the role of an educator is in society, what the role of education is. And the bottom line is, and I actually had 3 provocations here, but the bottom line is, if we ignore this, if we shove our head in the sand, if we don't take this seriously, if we just think that AI is about creating the perfect prompt for ChatGPT, we will not get this right.
Yeah. No, those are fantastic. Those are fantastic provocations,
right?
No, and I trust I hope no one threw anything at you, right? Like,
and it was all done in good humor, and so the idea is, this may be wrong, but I think we've got to think about these things.
Well, and I think if I going back to the last episode that we released, where we were talking about the tech trends, right?
Yes. That
when we think about and making these provocations, these are based on the trends that we are seeing with these things moving in the way they are. And I think what I'm really curious about too, this is something I think about often, even just daily in some cases, is what will be the response in the educational systems from the full stack, right? Higher education, graduate, undergraduate studies, all the way down through K-12,
yes,
both formal and informal learning. Because normally, again, this is a sector that is used to getting the technology last.
Right.
In many ways,
yes,
right? They're used, and now they're not, or they can't, like as we were just talking a little earlier, that normal cadence of these things coming through is kind of gone.
Right.
And and I think I added to my tally of butchered quotes, but I mean, it's this idea of advancing a decade in months.
Yes.
That compression of these things. And when you have but yet our time still progresses at the normal rate.
See, that's right. We're still humans. We still human. Live on a human sort of time scale.
It still takes us time to have an experience, process that experience, think about it, see, do that internal reflection of myself and my environment. How does this make me feel? Like we still process that at the, let's say, the 1-to-1
right, yes,
time ratio. And now if you enter in an innovative or development life cycle that's running at 10 to 1, you simply can't react to enough of these things in time.
This is so interesting. I'd actually never thought of it in this precise framing, but this gets to sort of my ideas around what happens when the speed of innovation is faster than the speed with which we can correct the problems it causes. But if you now begin to look at it in terms of human timescales, all the way from the generational timescale just to the timescale, the cadence of our lives, when you get to that point where the speed of innovation is faster than the cadence of our lives, that raises profound questions around how we actually manage that.
We don't know what happens.
Right, yes.
I mean, I think, again, like so many little ideas are bubbling right now too. I mean, again, if you step back and let's evoke Postman again with this idea of like all these, we know as a species, we know he rings 3 times now. I don't know.
No, actually, I'm not getting into compression. He rings 1,000 times.
Right. I'm not touching. In a
couple of milliseconds.
But, so you can back up and you can say, yes, as humans, we know how to deal. We've been dealing with these sort of changes ever since, the Gutenberg or even predating that in terms of these massive transformational technologies. However, I think that the caveat to that or the exception to that has always been, yes, but that's always transpired at in hindsight, relatively slow human pace.
Right, yes.
And so I start to wonder right now, again, this idea of as that accelerates, to what point can you just no longer cognitively handle the change that's coming? And so then what happens? You either say you can be overwhelmed or you can just let go and let things kind of flow. And then what's exciting and somewhat concerning, I guess, about this is like we don't know yet in our human history of how we will adapt or handle this. Because you can also see that what a great way for bad actors in the broadest speed of like, this could be corporations of just trying to run things through, knowing that you can't. It's my master plan
working within the chaos. I mean, there is certainly a way of operating if you're simply looking at power of an influence of either creating chaos or taking advantage of chaos. Because when there's chaos, you can see opportunities of cutting straight through.
Look over here while I just push my master plan all the way. Because the other thing that strikes me too, again, just this concept of our lived human experience of time versus the speed of innovation. Is, again, looking back at that, 20th century, it wasn't that long ago in human history that as a parent of a child, you would have or one yourself, right? You being just the person, you would have no expectation that your life would be any different than life of your parents before, or if you were to have children, like you lived the same basic life. You had the same things available to you. You lived in the same geographic location. The social structures had their ebbs and flows. But, I mean, it was like, there was no expectation
of it changing.
That there would be a technological change that would ultimately either benefit or destroy your life. And now, again, this is even that on the time scale of humanity is a very new thing. And now you enter this newer thing. That is like, and now not only is it that, it is almost on a week to week, monthly basis.
Now it's on a weekly basis, which is just crazy. It's funny you saying that. There's a beautiful quote that I've used before in my writing from a British writer, Laurie Lee, wrote a autobiography, one of a number called Sided with Rosie. And he talks about growing up in sort of Britain in sort of the early sort of 20th century. And this quote basically says, and I can't quote it, but the essence is he was living in a time in rural England, early 1900s, where life had been the same pretty much for the last 1,000 years. And then he began to see the sort of the new technologies coming in, the automation technologies, and he was basically saying, everything is changing so fast after that 1,000 years of stability. And he captures this idea of just disruption and confusion and opportunity and threat quite wonderfully.
Yeah.
But it feels like that now, except everything's compressed. Instead of everything being the same for 1,000 years, it's everything being the same for the last sort of 10, 20 years.
Yeah.
And now it's going crazy.
No, I mean, even, because again, I'll pick on my own self as an elder millennial. It's like when I started elementary school, we did not have computers in the classroom. We did. The internet came out when I was, commercially available, right? When I was transitioning into high school, and things like that. So very early days, I mean, college computer labs were filled with Napster and CD burners and all that kind of crap, right? So we would always be like, the kids, as then the generations that came behind us or whatever was like, you guys don't even know what it's like not to have the internet or all these things. But now, I mean, it is only, even with like the generative AI push and incredibly, that was just 3 years ago.
Yep.
And all of a sudden now to look about what that difference whatever that was, November 2022 or whatever it was, to today, how much has shifted.
See, that's it.
Just in like the daily operations of, again, you can't write an email, write a Word document.
Without the system sort of suggesting how you might want to write it. Yes.
Or even like your text messaging. You pull up a thing and you're like, well, okay. You're like, sounds good. But it's incredibly insane and how fast that has moved.
And it's getting faster. So I think this is the thing. We're only seeing the beginning of this wave.
Yeah.
So now, even this last week as we're recording, there have been a number of things that have come out from AI companies. We're getting closer to agentic AI that can make decisions for you and go away and decide for itself what it's going to do. So everything is being shaken up. And then you bring this back to this fundamental question of, what is the purpose of learning and education in this changing society?
Yeah.
Because I don't think we can assume that the model that's existed for the last several decades, where we have teachers and classrooms and people effectively pay for an education, especially in higher education.
Yes.
And they pay to be imparted this knowledge and these skills from experts in the field. I cannot see how this model is going to be sustained. We've got to think differently about it. And that means going back to the fundamentals, and this was part of the talk of, why do we educate people? What is the whole point of learning in society? And it's actually fascinating to ask that question. Why does education exist in the first place?
Yeah.
And I made the argument, and I actually pointed out, this is a very, very simplistic argument. There's more to it than this. But if you think about education as harnessing our innate abilities to problem solve, to create value faster than we otherwise could do just by relying on instinct. It makes a lot of sense. So formal education and actually learning is a way of unlocking our potential so we can create more value, whether that's personal value or societal value.
Economic value,
Which is it's a very powerful model. But what happens when AI creates that value far faster than we can? I mean, what's the role of education then if AI is already doing this?
Yeah. No, it's crazy. I mean, it's making me go back to like grad school in some way, right? Because that was one of the questions with a lot of stuff is understanding the history. Well, in the U.S. especially, like understanding the history of education. And for example, like why is in the United States, for example, why is it compulsory legally, right? And you come back to all the way to the origins, and it was about creating a better civil society, that people, as you could be a functioning member of society by going through all these pieces.
See, and I thought it was just wealth creation. It's so you had all those workers who could make the money for other people.
Get factory workers ready to go into, but understand what how, like civically understanding how things worked and all this kind of, it's wild though. But that I think raises a tremendous question. And this is a massive provocation for not just educators, but it's communities, it's society, it's the community, it's the parents, it's all these things of asking this question of, if we get to a point where, again, knowledge free, intelligence, anyone can have it, or assisted or whatever, however that works. You really, and we've talked about this before, I think it was last time or the time before, about changing the way we think about assessing someone's knowledge or their ability to learn something. But it really questions the whole fundamental structure of what has been there before. because it was built for a time where we did not have these things.
That's exactly it.
And now, not only do we have them, they're coming faster and faster and faster in a way that is difficult to keep up or assess them. So it really, I mean, there really is this, I mean, whatever you want to call it, this inflection point or this pivot is coming where there will, one way or another, whether intentional or driven by the invisible hands that float around, whether that be, economic, societal, governmental, whatever, like it's going to change.
Right.
And the question is, how do we make that change? Again, going all the way back to all the way back to driver's ed here. We're in this situation. Change is happening at a faster pace than we know what to deal with. How do we now get ourselves out of this situation with the least amount of harm done to ourselves and others? And that's a really sticky.
I think it is. And of course, part of this is asking that fundamental question, what does it mean to be human? And what does human thriving mean? What does the future look like when our lives and how we feel the value and worth of our lives is better than it is now, in a world where everything is changing? And I think even from an educational perspective, we've got to ask that question, what will it mean to be human in this future where intelligence is free and AI is accelerating everything?
I think that's an important question that we all need to start asking because, I mean, to be honest, even when I think about that, there are times where I kind of sort of catch myself being somewhat bemused by the absurdity of modern work in some ways, right? When you're like, when you boil it down, you're like, I look at a screen, it shows me things, I click on a bunch of stuff, I type a bunch of stuff, and then I go home feeling like I've done, you know what I mean? Like,
you feel fulfilled with that?
There are times where I'm like, wait a minute, but I didn't, like, did anything really happen?
I know, I get what you mean. It sometimes feels like it's an illusion. It's a social construct, this idea that the money flows and we do things, but what are we really achieving?
There's part of that. And these are moments that, like, as you're like, like, wow, that was a great thing I wrote. And you're like, but it only exists electronically. Like, it's never print, or barely, unless it ends up in a printed book or journal.
Just ones and zeros somewhere in the cloud.
And then you're like, so wait, I clicked things, I pushed things.
And it may seem sort of a little facetious and trivial, but actually I think this is a really important question. What is the value, what brings value to human life? What brings value to being human? What does it mean?
What does it mean to be human? Yes. And, and again, I'm drawing these mental images, right, of like a corporate environment with like cubicle farms, right? If you kind of imagine that, or and pull back the visions from Office Space, great film, to kind of bring this home. And again, it's you hear the clickety clack. It's people clicking on stuff all day long. But it's like, so what is it you do here? Right. And they're like, well,
so the image in my mind is actually going back to sort of hunter-gatherers. Where sort of the subsistence, they had to go out and hunt and gather in order to sort of stay alive. But now the staying alive is back in front of a computer
filling
screen.
out TPS reports, right? And then like, do you understand if I make
the modern day metaphor of being a hunter-gatherer?
Yeah, you're like, if I make a mistake, I have to hear about it from 5 bosses, right? And so, but the point where I'm going with this though is, if that is in many ways, which is a bulk of what people do, and not to be reductionist, right? Because what you're clicking and clacking on and clicking has impact somewhere, right?
See, that's it.
Whatever that might be. But in an age where the intelligence is free, the knowledge is free, if and there's lots of claim around this, right? That we've talked about it before on our show with these claims that, and I think correct me if I'm wrong, I think it was even Sam Altman was saying we'll see agentic AIs in the workforce this year.
That's what he did,
right?
Yes.
So if those tools can enter the workforce and take away that drudgery, if you will, of like, yes, I click on...
There are definitely inverted commas there.
Yeah, exactly. Of taking away those things that are whatever. It's doing the clicking and then the pointing and the things, freeing the human up to do what?
Right.
And that's the big question is, what?
And of course, this has been a debate for decades now. The idea that what we all strive for is more leisure time. But of course, the pushback is that leisure time is only meaningful if you've had to work for it.
Sure.
So what happens if you don't have to work for it? The answer is boredom, but boredom in a bad way, not in a good way, with people getting despondent because they don't feel as if they're creating any sort of value.
Yeah. No, I think about that a lot too, is like, because it's like, and this has been around for a long time with the promise of things like universal basic income. And, because again, if you think about, going all the way back to something like a Star Trek, for example, that is, the setting is in a post-scarcity society.
Right.
So anything you want, you got. Right. There's no needs. There's no poverty. There's no. Everyone is fulfilled somehow.
Right. Yes.
Although I'll know a lot of them have to get on a spaceship and get out of go seek a life danger to be fulfilled. But but in a post-scarcity model, or one that as we like inch towards one, something like universal, if AI or some sort of automation were to remove, let's say, 75 or 90% of all the human jobs there were, then what? We'll supply it with basic income. Everyone will just get paid because...
But then what do you do? So actually take that and bring it back to my oversimplistic model of education and value creation. So think about learning and education as being there as a way of allowing us to realize our potential to create value. Now, the question is, what is that value? Pre-AI, that value was obviously creating things, creating wealth. It fed into the whole economic system. Now you can ask the question, if AI can do all of the economic-based stuff that we used to do in the past, what does it mean to create value? What does value mean in, as you say, a post-scarcity world? And it may be human connections, human relationships, expression, exploring ideas together, living a life where we're just wowed and amazed by the things we discover. If that is the case, what is the role of education? What should we be teaching people? Should we be teaching people how to be awed by the wonder of the world around us? Is that a skill that we're looking for in the future? Is it forging meaningful relationships with other individuals? And so I think this is looking far into the future, but I can imagine a complete and utterly different skill set. We're no longer looking at the skill sets that we needed to sort of build society within a market economy. We're looking at the skill sets needed to ensure human flourishing, where machines do a lot of the economic heavy lifting.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, that's a fun space to play in, because this is stuff, I mean, we can trigger all kinds of tools, right? But I mean, this is part of that what we can do is we can make some assumptions, right? So if we move the time frame down, let's move it. I mean, God, just given the speed at which things have happened now, even if we move it conservatively, like 30 years, right? There's a lot that's going to happen in 30 years. But even then, we can take it, let's go 50 or something. We'll be old, we'll be brains in a jar maybe or something.
I will be gone by then.
I don't know. We could be brains on a jar. We could do this. If the singularity happens, my friend, we could do this forever.
You mean I'll have had my brain scanned. I'll be uploaded into the cloud, yes.
But if you think about it, right? So if we make some assumptions that we've reached that, we've past this hurdle or this pinnacle, and we have reached a space where exactly that. We have a post-scarcity model of to an acceptable degree, but then it changes completely. What is the role of does educational systems as they exist today, do they still exist then?
Right.
I mean, we can call that into question very quickly, especially with things that are not considered compulsory, like higher education or things like that, these traditional institutions. And I remember Ed Finn was like, well, they've never been about that. They've been about more of the human connection and things. But still, you ask the question of, if the historical value of, or the historical reason for these institutions to be built to support are no longer there, then do we still have them, or do we start completely over? Does it merge over time? How fast does that change take place?
And is that transition? Which is critically important.
And then, I mean, in human history, we have examples, I think, on both sides of how messy that transition can be.
Yes.
Because there's also, right, you can see, okay, on the danger side of things, if we transition and say, oh yes, well, everything is working, do we end up just being that like frog that gets slow boiled where we've lost the critical ability to question.
That's it.
The system.
And we're already seeing publications now where people are worrying that with AI coming in, people are losing certain skills. They're learning possibly reasoning skills. They're certainly losing math-based skills. Which is also an interesting framing because, yes, you can tear your hair out and say how awful that is. But if we don't need those skills in the future, should we be looking at this in a different way?
Yeah.
And I don't know the answer, but definitely things are changing already.
Sure. Well, and I think even if you just look at it as a pure sort of like as an animal on this planet, right? Like we're wired to give us the things that we need for survival.
Yes.
And we'll strive towards those. And we and hopefully have a fruitful and enjoyable life along, but it's going to be filled no matter what. It's filled with adversity. It's filled with challenges and obstacles to overcome. And that's an interesting space when you start saying, well, you don't need, these things that you labored over or stressed over or really agonized over. Turns out we don't need them because we've solved that.
Right. Yes.
But that does raise a question then, do you as an entire species, do we get to a position where we've long forgotten how to do the things, right? And then potentially some catastrophic...
It's when the machine breaks.
That's right.
And somebody flips open a manual and it says here, turn it off and on again. And somebody says, what does that mean? What does off mean? What does on mean?
I can't help. All that's swimming in my brain right now is just all Hitchhikers references, right? To all these things. But I'll even just anecdotally on a small scale, I think I've shared this before. I have often been reminded of this very quickly when all of a sudden, like you lose access digitally to like a credit card or something. And suddenly you're like, wait, what do you mean I can't? Like you're cut off.
I know. Yes. What do you do?
You're cut off from society and that you're like, what do you mean I can't? What if I can't pay? Like, I don't have any, I don't have a wallet. Like, where is my, like, it's all digital, and so quickly you're
moment of panic. Yes,
yeah. Or even, if you look a larger, having like major power outages.
Right. Yes. Yep.
And I remember experiencing this years ago, like back in college and things like that. There was these major like blackouts with power outages. No one could get gas because this was also the time everyone was converting to everything being digital,
right?
Whatever.
Yes.
But it was like gas stations couldn't accept money because of the way they had structured everything was credit card payment. It was like, oh, we can't sell you gas.
Yep.
And what do you mean you can't sell me gas?
Which is why it's so important to understand these systems as complex systems where everything is interconnected.
That's right. And that they all have these points of failure.
But then you expand that out to thinking about sort of humanity and individuals as part of that complex system. You then begin to understand just how vulnerable potentially the system is to change, even change that feels good.
Yeah.
You're putting vulnerabilities in.
Yeah.
But one thing that actually fascinates me with this, and again, it comes back to this idea of what will we do in a post-scarcity future? What is the role of education and learning? And just making it very personal, I find this fascinating because I look at my own life. I look at sort of what drives me, what brings me meaning. And it's all stuff that I think I would do even if I didn't need to worry about getting paid.
Yeah.
Because the things that drive me are intellectual questions. They're what-if questions. They're the excitement of discovery, that ability to experience wonder through curiosity. So I actually think that I would have a fantastic time if I didn't have to worry about working to get a salary. And because of that, I've got to believe that many, many people have this capacity, as long as we work out how to sort of flip the equation, to thrive in a world where they don't have to work, but there are other ways of creating value. But, and here's the but, in order to do that, you need some ability to actually learn that capacity to sort of follow that pathway. So for instance, if I look at my life, yes, I had that innate curiosity and that innate hunger to ask questions and to learn, but it was my training. It was my training through sort of high school and before that. It was my training as a physicist. It was my exposure to new ideas that really ignited and catalyzed that. Yeah. If that hadn't have happened, I wouldn't be the person I am now.
True.
So then that begs the question, is learning in the future, is education in the future about exposing people to these possibilities and effectively, going back to a metaphor that I seem to be using a lot at the moment, creating the playground that allows them to build and flex those muscles of what it means to be human?
Yeah, absolutely. And as you're talking, I'm thinking, And again, we spent some time, I think it was 2 episodes back again, about talking about John Dewey.
Yes.
I'm like, in a post-scarcity model where it's not, the education is not about training you for a job, but training you for how to, as you said, to explore the things that you find interesting and get value from. It is sort of like, in my opinion, that becomes sort of the focal point of that educational element is to learn how to foster and how, like individually and intrinsically, how to nurture those natural impulses for inquiry. How does the world work? How does this thing work? The communicating, the construction, building things with your hands, even though they might be digital, clicky clacky. But building something, and through the expressing who you are. And as you were mentioning it too, I'll see if I can find it so I can include it in the show notes. Remember, there was an article, it's a couple of years ago now. It was on the heels of a fairly large experiment. I think it was in a Scandinavian country of universal basic income.
Yes, I remember this.
And one of the pieces are, because there's a lot of criticism that comes with those programs and the criticisms are usually heavily based on their social handouts and that people will just take the money and not do anything. But what I think what that article had summarized really nicely is you were mentioning, if you had that opportunity, great. If I had that opportunity, same. But also we have a privilege that we work in a place that allows right. And I think a lot of people forget or don't know that so many people out there work to fulfill something because of the need for providing, that is survival.
See, that is exactly it. Yes,
and a lot of people work careers in jobs and in things that they don't want to do.
A couple of miles from here, in fact, even less than that, people are having to work 2 jobs, 3 jobs just to put food on the table and have a roof over their head.
And by the time, if you are one of those people, or someone, or your parents were someone, the toll that takes on, because it's just you're doing everything you can to survive. And what that study had found too was, for people, it gave them a reprieve from that. And their own fulfillment went through the roof in terms of they weren't taking the money and being like, this is a handout, I'm going to sit on my, I'm going to sit on my couch and do nothing. It was, now they could afford the opportunity to go do things like that, enrich their lives, take a gardening class, or, learn how to play a musical instrument, or all of these other kind of things that, because of their life situation,
they just hadn't had that opportunity.
They did not have that affordance to do. And for me, when I think about that post-scarcity thing, it's like, what a beautiful place if we would be able to handle that in a way that, of course, we're moving this down where all these have been solved, right? That it's fair, that distribution of wealth is somehow managed where we're all happy with it, which we'll see about that. But that the education becomes not about tooling you up for exams or for, the quote unquote factory employment, but is to enrich you so that you can make the most of your own existence.
See, that's it. That's the value creation. And it comes down to, I think, in that sort of future, how do we use learning and education, or whatever we want to call it, to allow people to develop those skills to create value to themselves personally and find those pathways towards value creation? And absolutely. That is a very, very different prospect to what we do at the moment. And one of the things it brings up, and I say this because it's part of other conversations I've been having, what does that mean for assessing the degree to which somebody has learned something? So at the moment, if you're giving them skills, you want to be able to assess those skills. You want to be able to say, if they're going for a job, here's the proof that they can do X, Y, and Z. But if you're training people to appreciate the world, to create value for themselves, do we even need to talk about assessment? Is it a little bit patronizing to say, we're going to assess your ability to appreciate wonder?
Andrew, I'm going to give you a score of 7.5 out of 10 on your own life fulfillment.
Yes. But this is where it challenges, in a good way, the whole constructs around learning and education. And it excites me because it opens up possibilities of how to completely rethink how we increase the value of being human based on how the environments that we build, where we're not just relying on our innate abilities, but we're using, I'm going to use learning as the environment, where we use a learning environment to allow people to fully leverage what they're innately capable of in ways that are profoundly impactful.
Yeah. And then we get into the real trick of this all, right? And it's like, now, how do we get there?
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
And I mean,
that's the challenge.
That's the challenge. But this is what is so, and just coming back here, maybe as a way of kind of tying this all off here is, when we think about futures and we do futures work and think about foresight and how do we think about these possible futures, exploring what they can be, and when they are desirable states, asking those questions, right? Of and there's terminology like backcasting and all these kind of things, and there are there's futurist tools to help us work through. But saving those aside, just more broadly, we start thinking, okay, well, what are the things if we want that to be where we end up ultimately? What are the things we start taking action on today? Tomorrow within our our short lifespans as they are until we reach again the escape velocity on aging. We only have a certain amount of time and we never know what that's going to be. And so what do we individually in our communities, in our societies, as we kind of broaden out, what are the things that we need to do to get there? And at the other side of that blade is what are the things we need to stay away from or be very cautious of.
That's it.
So they don't prevent us from getting there.
I think this is exactly how we need to be thinking. And I'm going to throw one thing in here as a placeholder for another conversation because I think it sort of distracts us a little bit. But as we begin to think about that future and the nature of being human and learning, especially in a post-scarcity future, we have also got to think about pathologies of a post-scarcity future. Because if we're not careful, we assume that everybody is good, and if they don't have to work for a living, everything is going to be wonderful. But the reality is that value creation to some people is going to involve harm to others. How do we avoid that?
That's
I'm going to put a pin in that because that's a long conversation.
You'll have to join us on the next episode,
right? Or sometime in the future.
A future episode. Well, I think that's a beautiful place for us to wrap up. And I'm going to redeem myself here because I feel like we've been recording for a while. I'm like, finally, my brain feels like it's actually working now.
You've remembered where you are and what we're actually doing here.
We've gotten to gear. But I think that's a beautiful place for us to end. And literally, just have to tune into the next episode, one of the next episodes of Modem Futura, which is the show that explores the intersection of technology, society, and the possible, probable, and preferable futures. Of course, where we ask deep questions like, what does it mean to be human in the future?
Nailed it.
It only took an hour after recording. So if you stuck with us that long, I hope you enjoy the laugh of, I finally got it right. I got to retake it. I got to retake my test.
There we go.
I got it right. Awesome. Well, Andrew, thank you as always. And we'll stuff as much as we can in these show notes.
I guess we'll see everyone next week.
See you on the next one.
Demodulating signal.
Modem Futura is a production of the Future of Being Human initiative at Arizona State University. Be sure to subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your favorite shows. To learn more about the Future of Being Human initiative and all of our other projects, please visit us on the web at futureofbeinghuman.asu.edu.
End transmission.